Hey everyone, my name is Beverly Crandon. I am a freelance writer for Good Food Revolution. And with me today, I'm very excited. We have Jannine Rickards from New Zealand, winemaker in New Zealand, winemaker at Urlar, and the phenom behind Huntress. Jannine, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Jannine, just out of curiosity, where exactly in New Zealand are you?
I'm based in the Wairarapa, which is on the bottom end of the North Island, just over the hill from Wellington.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Put it all into context, from continent to continent. So today, I've asked Jannine to join me to talk about all things orange wine in New Zealand, but from the context of the amazing work that Jannine has been doing in New Zealand for years. But before we get into orange wine specifically, Jannine, I've been reading up on the Huntress, and I'm a massive fan. And I don't think we can start this conversation before talking about the Huntress. And I'm wondering if you would mind talking a little bit about the Huntress, what it means, the philosophy. I think the Huntress deserves the stage before we get into orange wine. And I think that's a good segue for us to get into orange wine and natural wine. So if you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit about the Huntress.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Huntress is a very small sort of project of mine that's evolving. It started in 2017 with 1 ton of Pinot, and it's been really, really quite small parcels of grapes that I've been making into wine. Sort of with the orange wine technique, like skin fermentation on whites, and just obviously don't have a vineyard for Huntress, so I'm working with local, preferably organic growers to form relationships and be able to play, really. It's nice to have a creative outlet that you can be a bit more open-minded and playful with. Yeah. So it has really just been like a couple of ton all this time, but yeah, exploring techniques, and very much for me, Huntress is about like not just wine. The food comes into it quite a lot. So I'm involved with a kaupapa, a group here called Eat New Zealand, and we're all about community and knowing where your food comes from and supporting small farmers, fishers, and trying to link people with what they're consuming and having a better understanding of how things get to your plate or your glass. So I really enjoy aspects of growing and hunting for food, and it's just part of my lifestyle, and Huntress sort of embodies that. So I'm very much, I guess, a foodie winemaker.
That's the best kind of winemaker. I'm a little biased there. Again, now I'm going to ask another question that's not specifically orange wine related, but your whole passion around Huntress and what that means to you, does that have anything to do with your want or need to do more natural wine style? Just curious.
Definitely. I do think in terms of, I think that if you can show that site or that fruit in the most pure expression by being not minimal, I guess it's you have to be quite observant and be quite a good caretaker. But I think you can show a purity and that sense of place, and it just shines of a season, and it's less made to a recipe. I'm also a person who has a million cookbooks, or not that many, but quite a few. And I use them for inspiration, but I never follow a recipe. So I think it's about being in tune and connected to what's in front of you and moving and adapting to it. So you're not just, inoculating and doing this and following a recipe as such. You're trying to listen and see what is in front of you and express it in the most pure way you can without modifying it too much.
Yeah. And I think that's great, because not only does it give the consumer an understanding and sense of place, but it also tells them a little bit about the winemaker and the winemaker's personality. I think your personality gets a chance to shine through in that. So yeah. Okay, now let's just get back on track. I was the one that strayed to like Huntress and natural wine, but let's just talk about orange wine, and orange wine in New Zealand specifically. I'm curious on as to what your first exposure into orange wine was. Not making it, but what's this thing? What was your first exposure into orange wine?
Yeah, well, I had to have a little think on this. A really good friend of mine, one of my best mates, actually, she's Canadian, from Vancouver, and she makes wine in Hawke's Bay here. Her name's Amy, and she was probably the person who shared orange wine with me first. She'd done her WSET diploma and had travelled a lot, worked in different places, and she opened a Gravna. And it just kind of was so full on and different. I was like, yeah, I didn't jump into orange wine after that, but it certainly awakened an interest. And like those wines are so complex and intense, and it's like, wow, something I'd never seen before. And that was probably 10 years ago when we were working together on the South Island. And she herself makes really amazing amber wines as well. So, I think that would probably be my first exposure. And then I guess it's evolved with time. And I lived in Australia, and they've got a lot of different varieties and to play with, and quite a progressive in terms of the natural wine movement. So, I've had various. It sparked more interest for me, and then in New Zealand is sort of still growing, but yeah, that first wine, I just thought, what is this? This is just insanely different, and fascinating.
I will say that's a great way to get introduced to amber wine is through a Gravner. I'm for that. So let's talk about the journey. So you get introduced through Gravner, lucky you, spent time in Australia and watching their amber wine movement. What was the impetus to make you now start to make orange wines?
I think it was just a fascination with them, like in terms of the aromatic complexity and the texture, and how you can just transform a varietal that you've only seen often in a very sort of classic way into something quite fascinating and layered. And I love texture. So I sort of played around with using it as a component for blending into other wines with Erla, and then had wines I made for another label that went to Japan that were all amber. And then by that stage, I'd sort of got Huntress to a point where I had some Pinot Gris and I was making my own. So yeah.
So really that complexity around it is what intrigued you.
Definitely. Yeah. I think as bringing it back to food as well, textures are quite an intricate component of enjoyment of a meal. And for wine, I think it can be the same. And you can do some really clever sort of blending and bring in elements and layers into a wine to make it diverse and fun and enjoyable. Like we do with red wine making, those skin tannins and aromatics. I think I just really love like that the spice that you get, and the sort of the intense quince or orange or vibrancy that you can get out of the skins, and then you've also got the phenolic structure of it, which is basically a preservative, right? So tannin and tannin and texture and depth, and it feels like it's good for you. So
yeah, no, I agree. And that does make the wine a bit more robust and flexible when it comes to food. Now, you said something very interesting, which made me think about two questions for you. So you talked about, the gateway being Grosvenor and Australia and the complexity of orange wine or amber wines, and then delving into making it yourself first through blending, and then now making just pure orange wines alone in the bottle. What came first in terms of pure orange wine? Was it, I'm really enjoying this, I think this is great, and we could build and make something really special? Or did you see consumer interest and market interest in this, and that became a viable product in New Zealand?
It was purely out of interest, to be honest. I'm not bothered in following trends, or Huntress is really so small that it's kind of, it's not business orientated too much yet. It's just a playful place to be and expressive outlet. So yeah, it definitely came from just being interested and wanting to enjoy those wines, and there not being a huge amount on the New Zealand market. I mean, we are a small country. We have a small amount of interesting imported wines coming in now through different portfolios. But yeah, you see them in small amounts here and there and seasonally, but yeah, I wouldn't say that we're drowning in orange wine yet.
That's not a bad thing to be. Like be drowning in orange wine. In all seriousness, though, well, let's talk about the New Zealand market, if you wouldn't mind. How big is orange wine there? I mean, in perspective of market size, how big would you say it is there?
I think it's fairly small, especially in the regions. In the main centres, you've got quite interested and open-minded young wine drinkers wanting to taste something that is less formulated or less, made to that recipe, but and tells a story. So I think in the Auckland and Wellington and Christchurch, you're seeing a bit more open-mindedness around orange wine. I think in rural areas, it's kind of, people are more happy to stick with what they know, perhaps. But it's a growing market, I would hope. And winemakers are certainly interested in it. And from there, hopefully there'll be more variety of them out there for people to try. So I think it's pretty small, but there's room to move.
Well, that's always good. There's the market viability if there's room to move. Now, one thing I will say, and a lot of people, especially those who aren't in the wine industry, they think orange wine and natural wine are synonymous, and that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of amber wines that are not made in a natural wine style. But you, and correct me if I'm wrong and speaking out of turn, your amber wines are all natural.
I would have to say that I use sulfur. I like to have a little bit of preservative there, depending on the season. I think I've released one that had no additions, but I just feel for being able to see the purity of wine that you've spent so much time crafting be consistent. I think that a small amount of sulfur holds it in a place that is going to give everyone the same experience that you're trying to give. So sometimes, especially with a tough season where maybe there's a bit more weather pressure and you're sorting your fruit as much as you can, but just keep it fresh and vibrant and how you'd like people to enjoy it. I don't mind adding sulfur at all, but all wild yeasts and all full mellow and not filtered. I think the first one I made I'd filtered, but I think that was because I was worried about the malic residue in the bottle fermenting and going a bit nuts, but I just do full Malo now and let it settle and rack it as clean as possible. And so yeah, apart from a little bit of sulfur, natural.
Yeah, it's a minimalistic approach, right? It's a minimal approach to making wine. Any kind of challenges or variability that you see because you take that approach where you're very minimalistic? You're doing that and also making skin fermented wines. Any kind of challenges that you see in the winemaking?